Hi guys, welcome back to GCSE Geography Support. What we're going to be looking at today in a couple of videos are how to respond to command words. And the first one we're going to look at is assess. Now this is throughout your papers in your 8 markers, and it's really important that you do this really well because it can make the difference between you getting a grade higher or a grade lower. There's lots and lots of questions in Unit 1 and Unit 2 and Unit 3 that you need to assess. So what does assess mean? It means weigh up, okay? It means weigh up and come to a conclusion. So generally, you're going to be looking at 2 sides to something. So it could be advantages and disadvantages of something. It could be looking at how successful a strategy was. It could be looking at how sustainable a strategy is, etc. So you've always got 2 sides. And what I would suggest you do is you don't really need to worry about an introduction, but you do need to get straight in and look at whatever factors you're looking at. So paragraph 1, as I tell my students, will always be the first point. So what is the main advantage? Okay, what is the main advantage? What's the main success? What is the main sustainable point of the project or whatever it is that you're looking at? So you need to say beforehand, you need to think to yourself beforehand, right, I'm going to say some advantages, but which is the most important advantage? Okay, what's the advantage? What's the disadvantage? So I'm going to say the most important advantage or the most important sustainability point or the most successful point of this project is, and then I'm going to explain what it is. And I'm going to use my kind of BLT structure because this leads to, and then to give a more detailed explanation of why that project is good. And then at the end of that paragraph, I'm going to kind of conclude, as it were, and go back to the question and say whether it's successful or not. Okay. Then in paragraph 2, I'm going to take another factor. Maybe that's the negative of it, or how it wasn't successful, or how it isn't sustainable, and I'm going to explain the reasons why. Then in my overall conclusion, I'm going to say whether overall I feel, I'm going to weigh up whether I feel that that strategy or that factor or the factors that I've used are overall good or overall not so good, overall sustainable or overall not sustainable, overall successful or overall not successful, that there are more advantages or disadvantages. It does depend on the question, but you've got to imagine that you're not answering an explain question, which would be something like explain how top-down strategies work in development. You're not being asked about that. You're not being asked to explain something. You're being asked to assess it, whether you think it works or not. So you're going to use a bit of AO1 to tell the examiner what the content is, what's it about, but not solely that. Otherwise you cannot get out of like 4 marks. You've got to then assess whether it's working or not, whether it's sustainable or not. So you always need to be using that type of language. So it is very sustainable, or it's not so sustainable, or this part of it isn't sustainable, or this is not as successful as something else. And then say that in each of the paragraphs. And then in the overall conclusion, you're going to say overall, that's what I'd start it with the 3rd paragraph. I'd say overall, we can see that this strategy overall is sustainable because, or overall, it's not that successful for local people or whatever it is because. So depending on what the question is, you're going to go back to the question and you're going to really just answer the question. So remember, you're not answering an explain question, you're answering an assess question. You have to weigh up whether you feel the strategy is successful or not, or sustainable or not, and that's still successful, isn't it? So I hope that helps. And make sure, even if you're not sure of, you're not that sure, it doesn't really matter in the exam. It doesn't matter what you pick out as being the success or not the success. The examiner's not really looking for that. They're looking that you can justify your decision. You can justify whether you're saying that the strategy is successful or not successful. Nowhere in the mark scheme does it state that you have to state one point or another point, that you have to say this is successful or this isn't, or this bit's sustainable or this isn't. It's a judgment call on your part, but as long as you can back it up, then you'll get the marks. And even if you're not sure, you'll get more marks from stating it than thinking, well, I'm not sure whether, I'm saying the right thing, whether this is sustainable or not. So I'm not just going to describe and explain what the strategy is. You can't get out of higher than 4 out of 8. You've got to bump up your marks. And if you can do that in every 8 marker, then overall you're going to get a much better grade in your final grade, basically, because across the 3 papers there are lots and lots. In each section there are assess questions, so bear that in mind. Don't just explain what the strategy is, yeah, assess whether it works or not in your opinion, and you're done.